Hello, I'm David Glass, and it's a pleasure to be at a spot that most people in this region have been to from one time or another for a fundraiser or two, and that's the Rockin Ranch right here on the Petaluma River just south of historic downtown Petaluma. And we have people that are going to tell us about the story of this particular parcel and what it means to this region and the gateway to Sonoma County and the history of wine in the area. And who better to talk to than a couple of our guests, and one would be Gigi Hendricks, who is, along with her husband, the owner of this wonderful parcel and has shared it so often with the greater community for fundraisers. Is Jim McCormick, a proprietor and of viticulture and wine antiques. So the two of them together are going to tell the interesting story about this parcel, but first let's learn a little bit about them. Gigi, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
We're talking with a couple of experts about a historical property here at the gateway to Petaluma on the river. It's the Rockin Ranch, as it's known today, but the property itself has an interesting history.
Well, it was originally part of General Vallejo, father of California, part of his land grant. So it encompassed thousands of acres. And then later, it was divided into little sub-parcels. They say General Vallejo built our seawall. He had a wharf out here, and that this area, specifically here on the creek, on the Petaluma River, was a munitions depot for General Vallejo's troops. It later went to a man named William Byler, who actually was the first one to put in the wine grapes. Probably 1878, 1879, maybe a little bit prior to that. And it was approximately 200 acres that he did put along the river here, which was amazing. And we believe it's because, of course, there was easy access to boating. The boats could take, the big draft steamers could take the barrels of wine into the city, into San Francisco easily. And also there was a railroad here at Donahue Landing, so maybe he chose this area for that reason. Also very averse to any kind of frost because we're on the river. It's a little bit different. We get a lot of wind. It's actually a good grape growing area. So it went to Byler. He did quite a bit. He put in a big winery. Sold it to Mr. Fair, Senator James G. Fair, an old Comstock silver baron. Quite a colorful character who did put more money into the place, apparently built this big brick warehouse, wine storage facility, brandy distillery, brought in a big brandy distillery, from what I understand, a copper distillery from the World's Fair in France, had it delivered here, shipped here. He had in his winery cooperage for the storage of about 500,000 gallons of wine. So it really was one of the bigger wineries in Sonoma County, if not the state. What's left is a three-sided brick wall, about 20 inches deep, does date back to the 1870s, and they say Senator James G. Fair did build this big brick building in addition to his winery. Unfortunately, that winery was burned down. This big brick warehouse did survive. Of course, all that was left of it were the three sides covered in ivy, and it was used for, again, distilling brandy, for wine storage and aging and that sort of thing.
You would think that maybe there was the potential of some illegal activity going on here during the period of Prohibition then, because it's very isolated and brandy and wine were outlawed for a long period of time. Have you discovered anything in the history of this that tells you that that indeed may have been taking place?
My understanding is that was the case. Certainly after Prohibition in the 1920s, by that time phylloxera had hit a lot of these grapes anyway, but there was still quite a bit. This was still used as a party venue, is my understanding. They'd come in from Petaluma, from the city, to have their parties.
Well, he was probably, he was not a very well-liked man. He was extremely wealthy. He owned vast amounts of real estate in San Francisco. As you mentioned, he was involved. He was one of the big four of the Comstock Lode. They made huge fortunes. He was apparently quite devious in some of his business dealings. He was considered quite a womanizer. When he bought this property in 1891, he only lived 3 years and died in 1894.
He chose this area for his big winery and to build this big building, and to put in, because when he bought it, I believe it had 200 acres of grapes from Mr. Byler, and then he added an additional 300 acres of grapes and put in this beautiful copper distillery for brandy. He was also convinced, I think, by Mr. Carpy, his friend, who was some kind of a French wine expert, that this would be a good area for grapes, so he did it. Plus the fact that we know that in the 1880s, that was the big wine boom here because Europe had been hit with phylloxera, so they were hoping California grapes were going to take over and become the big wine region of the world. I think all of these wealthy gentlemen thought that this was going to be their next big moneymaker because Europe, especially France, was in trouble with that aphid, with the phylloxera infestation. It's called phylloxera. It's an aphid, and it actually just decimates the wine crop, and it did for all of us.
So here this parcel has this great natural air conditioner that we talk about in Sonoma County, and I don't know of a better example than this one because of the water that's all around it, not just the swimming pool water either, the river. So
yeah, we always have
it's
a beautiful
perfect.
breeze, and so we very rarely get any kind of fungus on the vines. They dry out quickly. We have the fog in the morning, the cool evenings, which is what the Pinot loves, the Pinot Noir grape, which we have here. But we do have a lot of microclimates. As you get closer to Lakeville, it's a little bit different. It's quite a bit warmer and less windy.
So when they grew the grapes originally on this parcel, did they do the crush here as well, or did they ship the grapes to San Francisco and crush them there?
Both, because Mr. Byler, actually there was apparently a winery in Petaluma, but he was shipping to different places. He didn't put a winery here till I believe 1889. But that winery here was quite substantial because, again, 600,000 gallons of cooperage of wine is quite impressive. And that was with here and with the not little, but the Wood Winery in addition, which is no longer with us.
It went through then a period of dilapidation when you took it over. Tell us how you found things when you arrived. How many years ago?
Well, we arrived here approximately 20 years ago, and my husband's quite the visionary. Get to the historical library, he said, get me some photographs of what this used to look like, and let's bring it back to what it was. And he also wanted to put wine grapes in. This year is going to be our 14th vintage. We started planting in 98.
Earlier.
Yeah, we're about 41 acres of wine grapes, and we get approximately 140 to 180 tons a year, depending on the conditions. You know, we have a small group of vintners who buy from us, people like Bouchain and Simi, John Hart for Heart's Desire, Clos de Bois.
What glass of wine are you recommending to somebody like that?
I would recommend Bouchain. They do a beautiful Pinot Noir. John Hart, Heart's Desire. He buys our grapes, and it says Rockin Ranch on it. He does a lovely Pinot Noir as well. Elizabeth Spencer on the East Coast. It's a boutique winery. They buy from us. They do a beautiful Chardonnay. Simi, Clos de Bois. They all have Sonoma Coast appellation, which we are because we're so close to the coast, and we have the river with the cooler temperatures and the winds. Then we hand it over to our winemakers. They're very clear on what they want, how many degrees of Brix, which means how much sugar, how much acid. They want it picked tomorrow. We've got to get it picked tomorrow. So then they take it from there, and it's their science and it's their art from there.
Okay, what about other things that go on this ranch? What about livestock?
Well, we had some quarter horses. Dairy animals we do not. We have one big fat cow that is a pet, and we did have some quarter horses. My husband's daughter did have a little bit of a business going on. She is pretty much retired due to some back issues. But basically, we've brought it back to being the vineyard. We have 41 acres of grapes. We're trying to keep that going, keep the beautiful Victorian on the other end going that was built in the 1870s. We tried to bring it back to more of a Spanish mission style in honor of General Vallejo. But just trying to keep it all intact. It's all good. Buy California wine is what I say.